Hi, I'm Sarah, and today I'm going to be talking about my current assessment philosophy and the journey I took to get to that current assessment philosophy. Now, to start off, I'm going to begin with my assessment ideas before I even started this class. So, before I took this class, I really had no experience in assessment. The only types of assessment I knew of were the traditional methods of assessment I had when I was in school. So that pen and paper, standardized test type assessment. The scale of 0 to 100 and that grade you got. And once you got that grade, you could just move on from what you were learning. And through this course, through the readings we did, and through our class discussion, as well as my experience in the classroom, my assessment philosophy has definitely changed and shifted. So the idea of not yet, that was huge for me in my development of my assessment philosophy. The idea that students don't need to fail something, or that students, if they do fail in some way, shape, or form, a number isn't attached to them that follows them for the rest of their lives and they have to move on with that number. I think that the idea of not yet, or the idea of you've got it, or the idea of let's continue to build this knowledge is super key to students. I think when we talk about assessment, we need to talk about relevant assessment. Now, that's where I get into the readings and how the readings contributed to my current assessment philosophy. So the reading by Louis Volonté, this reading resonated with me because it showed me a new approach to assessment. And when I talked about the not yet or the you got it, that's stuff coming from the teacher, just like traditional methods of teaching. But this idea of student-centered assessment that we see in the reading is huge. That definitely contributed to my assessment philosophy. If we're trying to make learning student-centered, why aren't we making assessment student-centered? I love the idea of student-centered assessments. The idea that students can self-assess, there's peer assessment, students can help co-construct either the assessment methods, the criteria of assessment, how they'll be assessed, what they'll be assessed on. All of that is great. When students have agency, they learn better. They're more susceptible to learning. The classroom atmosphere is better. Another thing, why wouldn't we get the input of students in regards to assessment? Now, I'm going to go to the last part in our success criteria right now, and I'm going to talk about the possible issues with my approach to student-centered assessment that contributes to my philosophy, and that was from lots of our readings and discussions. So some teachers might think that this takes a long time. It takes too long to do. Now, this might be true. It might take a long time. Some teachers might think that students just waste time away doing this, and that also might be true as well. Some teachers might think that students will try to mark themselves easier if they know they can, or try to get easy way outs. But not all of this is true. If student-centered assessment becomes the norm in a classroom, it won't be abused, it'll be the norm. So those were potential issues, and the reason those are wrong, not wrong, but the reason I don't necessarily agree with those issues is because once you've done it enough, once students become aware of this new way of assessment, they'll buy into it. They'll see the benefit to them, and it'll become part of the classroom climate. I definitely think that it'll take less time as students become more aware of it and more practiced in helping co-create things and helping assess themselves and their peers. Now, why is a big question. Why do I love this student-centered assessment? I'm an athlete, I'm a curler, and I never actually realized until this semester actually that the assessment that goes on the ice should be a lot like the assessments that go on in a classroom, but it's not. In the classroom, we're giving students a grade from 0 to 100, stamping that on them, and then once they get that ticket of 65 or 95 or 45, they move on. They forget what they learned, and the assessment is virtually meaningless. On the ice, on the other hand, when we get assessment, when my coach tells me you were a little outside, when I tell myself I didn't hit the broom, or when a teammate says, hey, you're not putting enough pressure on the broom, that is assessment that I can take in, that we can work together. I can learn from that. My teammates learn from that. My coach learns from that. And we all become better. I don't lose that knowledge. I don't get it right once and then forget about it. That is knowledge, and that is understanding that I can take forward with me because I was assessed by my peers, by myself, and by my coach. When students are given feedback, they can give themselves feedback. That feedback can be worked through. Students learn, retain that information, and gain valuable life skills. What should education be? And this is a question that I'm asking myself and that I've asked myself for a long time. What should education be? And I think it should be relevant to the time we're in. So what we're learning in our class and in our classrooms should translate into the world around us and into the world that these students are going to go into. Is writing a test and getting a grade relevant? I don't think so. That's why my teaching philosophy was shaped by people like Louis Vellante and Ann Davies. I really do think that through assessment, students gain a better understanding of themselves. Through self-assessment, students gain a better understanding of how to think critically about themselves, about their learning, about what they know. Students learn to take feedback from others through peer assessment and teacher assessment. And students learn to take what they know and apply it to something else or go deeper in their own understanding through valuable student-centered assessment. Getting a grade or getting a couple comments isn't going to grow that student, but getting feedback from 3 different places, applying that feedback, being able to produce something to show your knowledge is useful in the 21st century. So, recap kind of what I think of assessment. Assessment should be relevant, it should be student-centered, and those assessments should be able to move forward with the student in their own learning and in their own journey to being members of our society. In our society, no one ever stamps a number on someone. No one gets grades. Grades that's like you grade meat, you grade food. You don't grade people. You give people feedback. They apply that feedback, and as a result, everyone gets better. Why isn't that in our classes? I don't know. But I loved it when I did see it in classes, and I loved it when I heard it from different people who are assessment experts, people in the field who their pedagogy of teaching is infused with these new ways of assessment. Their philosophy of assessment is infused with these student-centered learnings and student-centered assessments. The co-creation of things. Crucial. Students are going to create things in their lives. they need to know how to do that with the help of a teacher first. They will become experts at assessing themselves someday. We will have awesome work produced in a couple years' time when students learn those valuable skills. So what is assessment? Well, a rudimentary definition would be finding out what students know. But I want to go deeper, and I think I have gone deeper, but I'm going to go deeper yet. So I think that assessment, there's so much room for instruction in assessment. Students are gaining valuable skills through assessment. So assessment isn't only knowing or showing what you know. Assessment is also learning and adding on to what you know. So I definitely think that assessment in itself needs to be valuable to students. Grades aren't valuable. Even though that's a type of assessment, I think the definition of assessment should turn to valuable ways of knowing what students know, or valuable ways of students showing what they know. Assessment is the idea of looking over something to grow. And I think that as an educator, I can't just say, yep, you got a 65, let's move on. You can forget about everything we learned. If assessment is done properly, students can take skills and apply them to other things. And even if students forget content, through the assessment, students learn things. For example, I did quite a few self and peer assessments this semester, and through that I learned how to edit videos better. I learned how to communicate better. I learned how to organize my ideas in a better way. That was assessment that I got from peers, from teachers, and from myself. And those are things that I can apply now, and those are common 21st century skills that I can take into the future. Well, I guess we're in the 21st century, but I mean like future as in like future endeavors. So assessment should be something that students take as valuable information for their own growth as individuals, as learners. Assessments should be individualized. If learning is inclusive, assessment should be inclusive, and that's part of my definition as well. Assessments are inclusive ways that students grow as learners, and as people through feedback and through knowing and showing what students know through themselves, through the teachers, and through their peers. I think that looking at the common branches of assessment is very important in understanding assessment. So I'm now going to go into summative, formative, and diagnostic assessment. So what is diagnostic assessment? That is when you do an assessment before any learning per se is taken place in the class. So students through diagnostic assessment will learn what they need to pay attention to in class, what they already know, so that's what they can contribute, and things that they might be interested in through this new learning. Diagnostic assessment is also important to the teacher so they can know what the students know. If all the students know something, why would you spend a lot of time on it? Why don't you go deeper into that understanding than spending a lot of time on rudimentary concepts that students already know and understand? So, diagnostic assessment is for the betterment of the class, of the individual, and of the teacher's teaching. I'm going to teach more beneficial things to my students once I've done the diagnostic test, and they're going to have a more fulfilled learning experience through their own diagnostic assessments. Formative assessments. Now, formative assessment is the ongoing assessment or ongoing evaluation of learning that happens throughout the class. It's that check for understanding. It's that this isn't going to follow you for the rest of your life if you get it wrong. Formative assessment is about making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, or doing something really well and learning from that as well. So formative assessment could be in the form of a fist of 5. 5 means I understand this so well I could teach someone else, and 0 means I need more explanation. I don't understand. And anything in between is to do with the steps of that student's learning. So that's an awesome way to do a quick formative assessment. Students self-assess. The teacher assesses the class. Another way to do formative assessment would be through peer evaluations of another person. So peers learn how to give critical and building feedback to others. They learn from others' mistakes or from others' right doings. Students learn from their peers, and they get that useful feedback from someone who's at the same level as them, and they're able to apply that to their own learning. Formative assessments can come in the form of a test or a quiz that's not going to count towards a student's final grade. That formative assessment is so important throughout the learning as it continuously builds on itself. Now, summative assessment is the traditional form of you get a grade and that grade is going to follow you, or you get a mark and that mark is going to follow you. Now, summative assessment is quite interesting, as a lot of people do that traditional form of summative assessment follows you. And a lot of people do summative assessment traditionally in the form of a test. Those tests are good and they're dandy for some students, but not for all. So my teaching philosophy, if this is going to follow students for the rest of their life, and they're all individuals and they all learn differently, and our class is inclusive, my summative assessment better be individualized, better be inclusive, better be diverse for my students. So that's where my assessment philosophy has definitely changed. My student-centered learning and student-centered assessment, and my idea of not yet or you got it, and my idea of going away with grades and in with new learning, that needs to be implemented in summative assessment. And I think I will implement that in my own classrooms. Now, summative assessment is interesting because traditional forms, students would write the test or hand in an assignment and forget about it days or weeks later, or even hours later. Whereas this new form of summative assessment that will help grow the student is going to enable students to build on their learning continuously. So in terms of our assumptions within the classroom and through assessment, I definitely think we need to start overcoming these assumptions, and I think that'll happen through new methods of assessment. So our assumptions on a student's abilities might be skewed slightly based on the grades that that student receives, based on how they perform on a test or how they perform in the classroom. That doesn't actually show their knowledge. Our traditional ways of assessment doesn't always reach every student. So that's how we can break those assumptions about students. Our assumptions about assessments, what works and what has worked for 100 years might not always work. We need to break those assumptions, try new things, try out a different way of assessment, and then we can make decisions based off of that. Another thing I think too is we need to start implementing new non-traditional ways of learning in an assessment in the classroom. So if a student thrives as a dancer, as a singer, as a performer, as a video game player, as no matter what, you need to start implementing that and assessing that and using those as assessment tools. No matter how the student wants to tell you what they know, that should be assessed. For example, in the French classroom, I'm a French and social studies teacher. I can start using this. Verb conjugation sheets, like worksheets, are super boring. If a student were to make a tutorial or write a song about it, that would be so much more interesting. The student would learn so much better, would retain that information so much better, and I would actually enjoy assessing them. They'd be able to self-assess way easier, and their peers could give them feedback. So together we grow as a group. Thank you so much for watching my video. I thank you so much for the semester, and I hope you have a great summer.